Okay, so right now the U.S. Supreme Court is taking up a case that could impact how women get access to a commonly used abortion drug. The case centers around mifepristone, one of two pills used in abortions, and how it's delivered and distributed. It's Supreme Court's first abortion case since it overturned Roe v. Wade nearly 2 years ago. Dr. Frank McGeorge is here now to talk us through this case. And hey, Doc, good morning, good afternoon, rather. What's the crust of this argument right now?
Well, so actually it's not whether or not mifepristone can be used. It's about how it can be distributed more than anything. So right now, essentially, the FDA looked at the data and they decided that it could be prescribed online via telemedicine visits, it could be sent through the mail, and it could be sent through or distributed through retail pharmacies. It could also be distributed up to 10 weeks of pregnancy as opposed to only 7 weeks of pregnancy. So several groups actually came together and challenged that legally.
These are mostly anti-abortion groups.
Basically, yes. And so they came together and essentially coalesced into a group called the Alliance Defending Freedom. That was the group that essentially sued the FDA, looking to reverse those prior decisions.
Yeah.
At this point, the FDA, or rather at this point, the Supreme Court is now hearing oral arguments, trying to decide whether those arguments against those changes are valid.
Now, Doc, what are some of the ramifications or potential ramifications of this?
Well, so the biggest one is access. So, you could imagine if you're somebody in an underserved area, a more rural area, if you don't have access to telemedicine, if you don't have access to getting it through retail pharmacies, if you have to go to a physical physician's office to receive the medication, then your access is limited. But even bigger than that, this sets a precedent that the Supreme Court or courts in general could look at scientific data and decide that for potentially political or societal reasons, that scientific data was no longer accurate. And they could say, well, we just don't like that. We think that this should be reversed. And that's essentially what happened here. The FDA looked at the data and said, this is a safe, effective way to distribute this medication. And now the Supreme Court is saying, we're not so sure about that, or we're going to think about that.
Yeah.
That sets a dangerous precedent because now potentially any medication could be pulled back by courts instead of being distributed by what we consider a scientifically valid process through the FDA.
And access was one of the big topics of discussion, especially when so many states limited access to abortion. That sent so many people who wanted the process going to different avenues, whether it be different communities or states that did allow them, or looking at options like mifepristone.
Exactly. And so, mifepristone, of course, is one of two medications that are used to medically induce abortions. Mifepristone is one. Some people might know it actually as RU486. Okay. That was the name back in the 80s when it was initially introduced from France, actually. The other medication is called Cytotec, which is actually misoprostol. I know, right? It's like they named him on purpose just to mess with me.
Yeah.
Mifepristone is RU486. Misoprostol is Cytotec. They are separate medications, but they are used together to create medically induced abortions, and that's different than a surgical abortion. Yeah. But make no mistake, they are basically both abortion medications.
Well, no, Doc, thank you for your perspective, and especially like those folks who may be used to names like Plan B. How does that factor in?
Well, so that's actually an important point. Plan B is very different. Plan B is not an abortion medication. Plan B is a medication that is taken after intercourse to prevent a pregnancy. So it basically stops a pregnancy from even occurring by changing some of the hormonal situations that could produce a pregnancy. That is very different than what these medications do, and that is these medications specifically induce a medical abortion.
Again, Dr. McGeorge, thank you so much for your perspective. I know that you will be monitoring this.
Yes.
And giving us updates on what happens and how it's going to impact people across
and
our community.
We'll have more later today in the 5:30.
All right, thanks so much, Doc.
Sure.